So I'm Jeanne Marie Iorio. I'm from Victoria University in Melbourne, Australia. And I've met some of you yesterday, so you know that I'm an American that lives in Australia, so don't be confused that I don't have an Australian accent or anything. And I'm actually going to talk about the Out and About project, and like Mara, I'm going to repeat some of the stuff from yesterday, and then we'll move on to some of the actual methods of what we're going to talk about, which is walking. And I'm going to be strict on my time because I want to be done in 15 minutes talking so that we can go walking. All right, so I'm going to start with an acknowledgement of country. And one of the reasons why I start with an acknowledgement of country, this is something that we do in Australia. I am not Aboriginal and I am not Wadawurrung, which is where our research takes place. And so I cannot do a welcome to country, but I can do an acknowledgement of country. And so that's what I'm going to do now. This research was conducted while being with the traditional lands of the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that this land continues to be an important place of knowledge creation as it has been for many thousands of years. And this is a picture of Australia. These are actually the different indigenous, it's an indigenous Australian map, so these are all the indigenous groups or Aboriginal groups in Australia. And where this research takes place, you can see it's right down at the bottom, and it's on Wadawurrung country. If you notice that Wadawurrung is spelled different on this slide than the previous slide, because this is the settler spelling of it, and the previous one is the actual Wadawurrung Aboriginal spelling of it. Then you can see that this has made it just a little bit bigger, and so here's where our research takes place. And this is Melbourne, so this is the city, and then down here is the regional area where the research is taking place. Specifically, this research takes place in a town called Torquay, which is right on the ocean, so it's a regional coastal town. It's on the Bass Strait is the name of the water area that's there. It's about 10,000 people in that space, but in the next, they say in the next 10 years, it'll grow about 40%. And so I was having some interesting conversations with people yesterday after the presentation, because if you talk to somebody at the school where I work, and my daughter also goes to this school, they'll often tell you that they're not from the place. And so there's a lot of people that live in this place that really are not connected to this place. So it's a new place, and you know, even me being in Australia is a new place. And so it's this idea of how do you build connection with place if it's not been your place your whole life. It's located at the start of the Great Ocean Road, and this town is also known as the surfing capital of Australia. And so to give you context, if you've ever seen the movie Point Break, this is where Bell's Beach is, even though in the movie that's actually not Bell's Beach, they just refer to it. But we get lots of big waves, and all the surfers come every Easter time to surf at the Rip Curl Pro, so our town fills up with all the professional surfers, and kids are out there surfing with their idols, and it's pretty cool. So I just want to talk quickly that as in this research, how I'm positioned, because I'm a white settler woman. I'm an American living in Australia, and I've actually only been with Wadawurrung country. This is my 4th year. And so my understanding and experiences are always evolving, and so I'm always aware of things that I don't know, and then how do I get to that next place where I learn something else. And so I use these ideas that Karen Martin talks about respectfully coming alongside Aboriginal worldviews. All right, so I'm going to talk about Out and About, and you can kind of see some things that happen in Out and About. That's the name of our research project. It actually happens in 2 places. It happens in the coastal regional town, but we also have a site in Melbourne, Australia, which is run by my colleague, Catherine Ham. So we co-lead this research project. And today I'll talk about some of the stuff from our Torquay site, which is in our coastal regional town. It's about a 75-minute drive from Melbourne. Let's see what else. The school that I work with is about 500 students that are 5 years old to grade 6. So prep, that's the first year of school or kindergarten. But our 4-year-old program is called kindergarten, so it kind of gets a bit confusing with the different words. The classroom are all multi-age classrooms except for the prep room. The teachers that are also part of our research cohort at VU, so they actually study a lot of the things that they're doing with Out and About, are part of this group of teachers, as well as the community members that also do research with us around Out and About. Many of the teachers have been to Reggio Emilia, and they have when I kind of ended up there, they were already believing in this idea that children, or the image of the child, is capable, and they had a real strong commitment to themselves as researchers as well as children as researchers. Our students go out and about, these children go out and about every fortnight, and they go to 3 places in the community: Deep Creek Reserve, Taylor Park, and Fisherman's Beach. And they spend extended periods of time in there, so sometimes up to 3 hours in that place, and they encounter the common world, which includes sand, trees, rocks, water, plants, and of course colonial histories. And so this idea about Out and About, which is the name of our project, it seeks to understand how teachers co-participate with and support children in learning from their relationships with the common worlds. And so Common Worlds is our framework that kind of leads all this research. Common Worlds is part of an international research collective. So if you go to this website, you can see all the different projects that are happening around the world, and all of them have very different ideas because they're all in different places. And so in Canada, they go out in the forest there, and they talk about raccoons, and they talk about bees. So there's different ways that all of these projects are coming together, but they share this same theoretical framework of common worlds. So what we're talking about when we're talking about common worlds, we're talking about the humans and the more than human relations. And more than human includes multi-species. So this could be plants and animals. And also the place, or the local place where children live. And for us in Australia, the children that go out and about is very geohistorically specific because it engages in Australians' colonial past, present, and futures. And there's lots of entanglements that are happening between the histories and the other beings and the non-living entities and the elements and the discourses and the forces and the landforms. And that's actually, you can see that this is part of the website that describes our work. And so really what we're trying to do in an interdisciplinary way is to take the privilege of being human out of the center and to put place and the more than human in that place. Now, we know that we're human, right? And we've made that decision, so we don't know that we actually can do that, but it's that tension and that understanding about what happens when we think in that way. And so it's about these radically new relationships that can happen around this, where we actually rebuild the relationship between humans and the planet, and maybe we can stop some of the things that are happening around our environment with this radically new relationship with the environment. This stuff, a lot of it comes from ideas that are from Bruno Latour, and so we're looking at this idea that the notion of common worlds is an inclusive and a more than human notion, and it stops this distinction that happens between human societies and natural environments. And so we think by resituating ourselves within these common worlds, then our research will focus up on ways our past and present and futures are entangled with those other beings, with those non-living entities, with what happens with colonial histories and in relationship to how we're acting in the world. So as Ellis talked about, place is a really important part of this, and it's a critical part of this. And when I'm talking about place, the place in this research is the idea that it's not culturally or politically neutral. Rather, it's a place, is a territory that is indigenous and which has and continues to be subject to forces of colonization. So when we see place from an understanding in this way, it provokes us to pay attention to the political and the historical and the ethical entanglements, and then practice pedagogies that reflect those same ideas. So our project, our research project, draws on multi-sensory methods, and we're gonna talk about the walking bit of that today. So you can see some of you saw these pictures yesterday, but you can see some of the multi-sensory methods that are happening. Walking, listening, smelling, talking, touching. And we use Sarah Pink, her work, to really kind of help us draw those relationships and engage in these ideas or these methods. Something else that we think about is that place as a pedagogical contact zone, and this comes from the research of Donna Haraway, and it recognizes that there's something that happens in this, and that's placemaking. And placemaking also comes from Sarah Pink, where all the participants, the children, the teachers, the researchers, they're all coming together and they're co-participating and contributing and creating place as this very active and a very agentic place, I guess you could say. So our data is collected through documentation, and yesterday I talked through some documentation. I'm not going to show you any documentation up here today because you're actually going to engage with some of the documentation which I have here while you're walking. We use Latour's idea of tracing and assembling and paying attention to events that happen within the documentations and within our field notes and within our conversations that we have, and that's how we look at the events that happen in the data. So today I'm going to talk about walking with place, which is a really big part of our project, the idea of walking, and then we're going to practice walking with place. Okay, so what does it mean to walk? And so in our project, our first thing that happened was that we brought the educators together and they walked the place. And so this is some of the educators starting. We're at the top of the ocean here and they're starting their walk. So what do I mean by walking with place? So my co-researcher and colleague, Catherine Ham, she wrote a piece called Walking with Place, the Storying, Reconciling Pedagogies in Early Childhood Education. So Catherine first acknowledges that Australian Aboriginal history, culture, and ways of knowing as a primary way to understand where we live in Australia. And it requires us to think about place in a different way than the white fellow's way of coming up blind and bumping into everything, which is what Deborah Bird Rose offers us to think about. Catherine draws on Vanessa Watt's idea, and Vanessa Watt is, she teaches about Indigenous knowledge and methodologies in government and politics in Canada. She has this idea about place thought, and place thought is about thinking about place in a different way, drawing on the idea that the land is alive and thinking, and then she furthers this by thinking about exploring ways in which we think differently about the land. Focusing on Aboriginal ways of knowing can be used as a decolonizing practice. So Catherine brings together Watt's idea of place thought, and then she brings together Deborah Bird Rose's definition of country. And Deborah Bird Rose is an American woman who works in Australia and has been working in the Aboriginal communities for many, many years. She talks about country this way. Country is a place that gives and receives life, not just imagined or represented. It is lived and lived with. People talk about country in the same way they would talk about a person. They speak to country, sing to country, visit country, worry about country, feel for country, and long for country. Country is not generalized or undifferentiated type of place. Country is a living entity with a yesterday, today, and tomorrow, with a consciousness and a will toward life. So it's this way to think about land in a different way. So what Catherine has really thought about and what we've been really trying to engage with in this work is about how we pay attention to these layers of colonial inscription on the land. Now in Australia that's very relevant. It may not be as relevant in Denmark, but there may be stories on that land or the land where we are where we start to think about the layers that happen in there. So Catherine understands that in order to pay attention to the different ways, you must be awake to the possibilities and the proposals. And this is where we start to use learning to be affected, which is Latour's notion of moving past the binary and to be aware of the multiple ways that we see the world around us. And so it's that, sometimes it's that moment when you look at something and you go, and that idea about learning to be affected and how that affect really kind of gets at you. We also use the idea of Katie King's concept of past-present, and that the past exists with the present. So how we walk and where we walk, and how we walk with that past as we're walking in this moment. So in this sense, walking is not about going from one place to another. Rather, it's about a way of engaging with a place. It's not something that we simply do, but we have to be aware of those entanglements, and we see this catalyst as a relationship with the place and then with the more than human. So what I'm going to talk about now is the public out and about day. So Catherine and I received some money from the Surf Coast Shire, which is what the government that runs the area where one of our out and about sites is. And so we worked with our teachers and our educators to create a public day, because what they thought was that this idea of walking with a place was something important that needed to move beyond just the school. And so we got funding and we ran this really amazing day, and part of what we did was we created a booklet where the first part of it is called Listening with Fisherman's Beach. So our day started at Fisherman's Beach, and that's where it was the whole entire day, not just started. But it started with a local Wadawurrung educator woman doing a welcome to country. And so she's somebody who it took me 2 years to build a relationship with, and now she works with us around several of the things that we do. So again, it's this idea of slowing down and being patient, because often there's only one elder or one educator in a very large space. And so finding the time and slowly cultivating that relationship and being patient is part of that process. And so we worked with Karina, and the first thing she did was a welcome to country. And if you notice at the bottom, which I think is a really interesting thing, these are all the groups of people that have come together around this work. And they're very willing to support a lot of the things that we do. So this is our one school and our university and our second site, but the Shire wanted to fund us. This is the Great Ocean Road Coastal Committee, and so they are the land management and education group that's in that area, and they've been working alongside of us the whole entire time. So it's been quite an amazing experience because we have these relationships with the community organizations. We work with the Surf Coast Energy Group, and so that's a local organization as well, and they've also been involved in a lot of our out and about, and they've included building a documentary around some of the practices that we've been using that they've been sharing with the public. And then this is a local surf psychologist who does walking with place with his clients. And so he came, and they all offered things for people to engage with place. So we called this day, Join Us for Multiple With Place Experiences, and it was free to the public. And so we started with Karina, and then we offered walking with place every 15 minutes. So whoever showed up, and the people who were our volunteers were our educators. And the children would join them in that walking with place. So they led all of the walking with places. And then we had engaging with place, which was our Victoria University students. And they would actually engage with all of the Aboriginal stories in small groups with the children that were attending the day. Then we had biodiversity with place, which if you see right here in the back, this is the Great Ocean Road, they have a trailer they bring to places, and so they've been exploring ideas about what happens when you think about biodiversity with place, and so they were recording all the more than human things that live on Fisherman's Beach, and so the children were all engaging in community members and helping to build that database of what happens in that place. And then we had Richie Bennett, who is our surf psychologist who does walking with place. He did meditating with place. And a very interesting story that happened around that was that while this whole group of people were meditating with place on the beach, the skies opened up and it started pouring. And he said, now you can choose to respond with this place and stay with us, or you may choose to do something else. And everybody stood up and walked off. It was like pouring rain. But then, as you can see, so you can see that these are our documentation panels. And so these tell some of the stories. This one is about smelling. You can see the hand up here. This one was about, I think, walking with place. And this one over here was about walking and smelling with place. And so we had those up. And they're also, our documentation panels end up in the Surf Coast Shire, and they're in the school, and so we try to put them in lots of public places. But this is the group, and they're walking with place. And can you see the rainbow? So that was after the rain, and people were still down there walking with place. You can see someone surfing. But these are all groups of educators down here. So, are you ready to walk?
Yes.
Okay, so I have 10 books. So I'm going to ask you to get into groups of 4 or 5. Now, our book looks like this. On one side, it says Listening with Fisherman's Beach. Well, we're obviously not at Fisherman's Beach, but this has some of the documentations that were built. It tells about our project, and it tells you how to use the book. So these are some of our documentations that happened over the last few years. And so we pulled different words of the children from all different places, and then we asked children to create new drawings around them, because this was this idea about if you were going to make it public, how would you tell them some of the stories of place. So that's for our day at the beach. But if you turn it over, it says Listening with Place. And these are all the questions and provocations that the educators wrote based on our 4-year project at this point, about ways that you can engage with place. And what the children say about this side is that you can use it anywhere, even in China. That was there. So you can walk to any place in any community, and there's all different words in here, all different provocations and questions. So as a group, once we leave here, our walking starts. So you can decide how to use the book however you would like. But we're going to go to the sculpture garden, but we have to walk there, and so the minute we start walking is how this starts to engage. Because going to the place is part of this commitment and that travel to there. So you can use the book, you can use this idea about what calls you into connection, or you can find one of these questions in this book that really resonates with you.
Ornaments and decorations.
Well, it's not about using all the words, but finding the words that have meaning and then use